Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 116. I am your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If he can't do it, nobody can. So don't even think about attempting. This is the world's first podcast where your wooden boat dreams will come true. Okay, I had to mix it up, folks. After 115 times of saying the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the world, I decided I'd try something different. Anyway, welcome to the podcast today. We're going to have fun as usual. The introduction is going to be a little on the shorter side because the featured segment is a little on the longer side. And while we are on the featured segment, it is today an interview with Iain Oughtred of the Isle of Skye in Scotland. Today is part one of two. I did two interviews with Iain here recently by phone. This one today is a biographical sketch of Iain where he talks about his youth, how he got into boating, some of his travels, how he started building and designing boats, and kind of his personal journey. It's a pretty fascinating story, so I would encourage you to stick around for that. We have some new subscribers to the electronic newsletter: Mike Lewis, Jeff Gilbert, Edwin O'Neill, Ben Strandberg, and John Berman. Welcome to the newsletter, guys. Good to have you on board with that. For those of you that aren't subscribed, I send out a monthly newsletter with tips, tricks, resources, videos, photographs, different assorted things about hooked on wooden boats and other wooden boat activities. It's a free newsletter, and you can subscribe by going to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. I would encourage you to do that. This past week, I really didn't do anything at all with wooden boats other than think about my next boat build, which I have not decided what I'm going to do there. However, I did work on my website a little bit, and the pages are loading fairly quickly now that I reduced the number of posts that are loading when you go to the home page, for instance. So now instead of 16 loading with photographs, there's only 4. It's much faster, so check it out. I think you'll find that it's working much better. And by the way, if you're looking for a specific episode, or you want to see a list of the episodes and who or what the subject is, who I've interviewed, if you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/index, or you can go to the menu at the top that says Podcast Index, you'll find a complete list of all the episodes, what the subject matter is, who the podcast is with, and a link you can click on and take you right to the podcast. So that's the easiest way to navigate these 116 podcasts. I also wanted to say Merry Christmas to all my listeners. I'm recording this on December 16th. I keep looking up at my November calendar trying to figure out what day it is. Well, that's not working. I got to change that, but I'm pretty sure it's Monday, December 16th when I record this. It'll be published on the 19th for you to listen to, and I want to say Merry Christmas. I hope you have a great Christmas this year. I was going to say keep the sunny side up and the barnacled side down, but I'll save that for later. In an upcoming podcast, probably in 2 weeks, right before the new year, actually that would be next week, probably I'm going to do look at the year-end review for Hooked on Wooden Boats and kind of talk about what happened this year and some of the highlights and some of the fun things, so you're going to want to come back for that. Okay, we're going to move on to the interview with Iain Oughtred of the Isle of Skye in Scotland. So take it away. Let's roll the tape. Okay, it is December 14th, 2013. I am on the phone with Iain Oughtred of Isle of Skye in Scotland. Iain, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
Yeah. And so, Iain, it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon your time, and you're kind of in the middle of winter there. Is that right?
That's very right. It's very wintry.
Yeah.
Winter at this moment.
Okay. How long have you lived on the Isle of Skye?
12 years.
Okay. Very cool. So, Iain, I thought we'd start with talking about just some highlights of your growing up, your youth years, and any boating and stuff you did there.
Yeah, right. Well, me and my brother, we bought an old boat. That's when we lived in Australia. And we sailed around all over the place and got very wet, falling over all the time, and tremendous fun. And I was just instantly became kind of obsessed with it.
How old were you at that point, Iain?
16, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What kind of boat was it?
Oh, well, it was a rather peculiar Australian design called a Vee Jay. It was the most popular small racing boat at the time. Very low deck, fully decked, very low freeboard, almost like a kind of a sailing surfboard, really. 11'6", 3'6", being quite narrow and tippy. Very lively, had a big sliding seat for the crew.
Wow.
But this was a very old one, very old, heavy one, in a fairly decrepit condition. That did the job for us.
Yeah. What was
then I got a Moth after that, which was a boat I always admired a lot. The Australian Scow type Moth, which is, different kinds of moths, and it's interesting how they evolved in Australia and North America and in Britain pretty much concurrently with roughly the same limitations, which was not much, 11 foot overall length and about 80 square feet sail area, and within those limitations you can do what you like. So they developed in 3 different directions, really. But the Australian Scow was always my favourite. It was a very simple, flat bottom, vertical sides, box-shaped thing.
What was the rig on that boat, Iain?
It was fully battened, single sail, quite a tall mast, very high aspect ratio, and later on, when I finally built one, late 1970s, just the time when the first English so-called skiff moths, which were not scows, they had a normal bow on them, called skiff moths. They're very, very narrow, very tender, and they're very difficult to sail in more than 15 knots of breeze. And very efficient up to that, and very quick, faster in light weather. But they had a very low sailing rate, very low, shorter mast and longer boom. Soft sail with bleach patterns, but not full-length patterns. And I think it was the first time national championships I saw 2 of them come to Australia, and that's the problem they had. They couldn't do anything with them over 12, 15 knots of breeze. But they had a good look at the Australian fully battened sail and decided this was vastly superior. So they immediately developed their sailing rigs in the same direction.
Interesting. Yeah. So then, so you started, your first boating experience was when you're maybe around 16, 17, is that right, Iain?
Yeah, that's right.
And then, so what was the transition from that to actually designing and building your own boats?
That was a long process. What I did after that, those 2 boats, those were the first 2. That's where I was learning how to sail, basically. Main thing I did after that was the 12-foot dinghies called the National Gwen 12, designed by Charlie Cunningham, who designed the C-class catamarans, named after his daughter. His boats are named after his daughters. Very lively boat, very demanding to sail, very fast for their size. Trapeze and a big spinnaker. Flat-reaching spinnaker, which I liked very much. Very efficient, quite close to the wind, like on a beam reach. And I sailed those that was my major experience, education, sailing those for 6 or 7 seasons. And I quit my job as a model maker in desperation and started building boats, and quickly built a Gwen 12 for a friend, and built 7 of them altogether. 3 for myself, each one I sailed for 1 season. And developed that design as far as I possibly could, and learned a lot in the process, as you would. And did well on the racing. We used to have the national championships in a different state of Australia every year, so that involved a lot of travelling. And the last time was to go to West Australia, which is 2,700 miles, for a week of sailing.
Wow.
Yeah. It seemed like an awful long way because it was very rough. Well, part of it right across South Australia, West Australia, at the time, it was 1,000 miles of dirt road, very, very, very rough, very fine dust. You had to keep your windows shut tight to keep the dust out so you could breathe. Problem with that was the temperature was well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and way over that inside.
Oh, wow.
So we just hammered along as hard as we could go. We drove, 2 of us, swapping over 18 hours a day. I averaged 40 miles an hour. Best we could do. That was the old Volkswagens, which were so tough they could do that kind of thing.
Was a lot of that road was unpaved, was it, Ian?
But yeah, 1,000 miles of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was an amazing experience because day after day, you'd be looking at the horizon, flat, dead straight line, going right to the horizon, and you'd hammer along half a day, and you'd get to that horizon, and there would be exactly the same scene appearing again after day. Never changed. And take it in turns, trying to get a bit of rest in the back. You'd lie down, and it'd fall into the hole, and you'd practically hit the roof.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that was a boat that you took the original design and you made some modifications to it, Ian, is that right?
Well, it was a one-design boat, so in theory they're all the same. However, at the time, in practice, there was a surprising amount of variation in every detail of the sailing rig, the rigging of the spinnaker as well. Different systems are tried, and during that period, there were synthetic sails appeared and flexible spars, which was quite a radical change. And we were experimenting with shapes of centerboards and rudders. People hadn't been too bothered about having a proper streamlined aerofoil shapes, but it seemed to make a difference. Those kind of refinements, and there's 1/4-inch tolerance on the dimensions of the hull, so you couldn't do much within that. Although later on, years after I never knew, I wasn't aware of anybody trying to push those limitations, but one guy later on did, by flattening the boat out within those, pushing right to the limits of those 1/4-inch tolerances, and he made a fast planing boat.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and I always feel a bit guilty about that because I was at that time, later on, the official measurer for the association. And friend who was having one of these boats built, and they, before they started planking her up, they told me exactly what they were doing. The guy had done the same thing with the OK dinghies, made them faster, the lightweight Sharpies, which were popular at the time. Explained to me what they were doing, and as a measurer, well, I thought, I can't see it's going to make any difference, make the boat go fast or anything, so I didn't say anything, do anything. And he was a friend, and he was a rival boat builder. But it was only a couple of years later, when I was actually sailing the boat in a few races, I realized what a different boat it was. And what I should have done, my responsibility as measurer, I would have said, this is not the Gwen 12, and it may not race if it's built to this shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was totally confirmed when that really hit me, was when the boat won the national championship.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's like building a boat 8 inches longer or something.
Oh, wow. And he did that just by flattening the bottom out, huh?
Yeah, it was interesting. Right to the limit of the, he straightened the keel and lowered the chimes. And it didn't do any good in light weather. The boat would sail quite free, about as fast, but 2 or 3 unnoticeable amount you couldn't point up level of the other boats. But as soon as there's any sort of semi-planing kind of breeze, which there mostly is in Australia anyway, she was up and away and unbeatable.
Wow, interesting. Yeah.
Interesting experience.
So that was the first boat that you built several of and sold, huh? The Gwen 12?
Yeah, I built 7 of those, 3 for myself.
Mm-hmm. So what did you do from there then, Iain?
Well, from there, I didn't fancy that journey back across the desert, so I was staying sharing a flat with a friend, and who sailed with me sometimes and later on, and we set off to go to England and travelled around together a lot, which was interesting, and ran out of money in London. We were driving vans and cars and things, and delivering furniture and stuff all over the place. It's a way to see the country, and things were not so easy in England. You couldn't just sort of build a boat what you could in Australia. And we came to Scotland in us as Land Rover, him and his girlfriend from California, Debbie, and they stayed in posh hotels, and they camped out in the back of the Land Rover in the freezing cold in January. So we actually got as far as the Isle of Skye, and at that time I was, in spite of the weather, thinking, yeah, this is Scotland is absolutely my place. This is where I belong. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. I regret that even now. Because when I got back to London, the news for my father had died, and I thought, I suppose I'd better go back there to Sydney, which I did, and I didn't have any money. I couldn't do it. I was thinking, should I try and buy an old motorcycle and ride? Wouldn't have got very far. So a friend of my father's who working business associate just gave me the money, bought the ticket for me, so which was very kind. And I was back there for a couple of years, and felt really like a fish out of water. I thought, what am I doing here? I thought I'd go away from this dreary suburban sort of meaningless kind of existence. Did a bit of sailing, which was fun. And eventually got back to London and spent some more time there. I worked did some drawing work. Oh, and I should say, when I was in Sydney, I achieve one thing. I got a job as a draftsman of a Naval Architect. So that was the beginning of learning how to design boats. And I stayed there for exactly a year, which was a good introduction to the basics and how to draw up a lines plan and those sorts of things, and how to fit engine bearers into outboard motorboats. Pretty tedious stuff, a lot of it, but then I was offered a job with a magazine which was quite new at the time. It's called Modern Boating, which was equivalent to what Practical Boat Owner, I suppose, here. Don't know what there would be in North America. Anyway, that was a lot of fun because what they wanted was to set up a wee shop selling boat plans and books. So I did that, and that was really interesting because the Naval Architect I'd worked for was selling a few stock plans, and so with this job I was able to make contact with a lot of other designers who were selling plans. And I made up a little catalogue of different plans that we had available, and I enjoyed that a lot. It was a great place to work and good fun. And right next door to me was Mike Fletcher, the sailmaker. He was working for Paul Elstrom's sail loft. So that was interesting as well. I even did a bit of sailmaking. How I got this job was meeting Bob Ross at the Seaplanes a couple of years, sometime earlier. Bob was a journalist he was the editor of Modern Boating magazine, and he was sent down to Victoria, Port Phillip Bay, where the first C-class catamaran challenge boats were being raced and selected. And I went down there as well with the one boat from Sydney designed by Alan Payne. And that was an interesting experience. And I decided, I realized that it was very interesting to sail these big catamarans. They're quite spectacular, 25 feet long, 300 feet of sail.
Wow.
Yeah, very impressive, and a bit of breeze especially, but I really didn't like catamarans at all. They were big, sort of very clumsy, awkward, and sort of lurching and twisting themselves. The two hulls are kind of fighting each other all the time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The awkward sort of way, and they're totally unmaneuverable, very, very slow to tack, and totally insensitive, and it was, beam reach, a bit of breeze, you could lift a hull, and it was quite dramatic and impressive, but you couldn't tack quickly, or those had no feel. It was like driving a fast speedboat, dramatic, but so what? And missed the single hull boats, and Tony, my crew, and myself, he was an experienced skipper, ex-Gwen 12 rifle skipper. So as a experienced skipper, he made a very good crew because he knew a lot about tactics and a good understanding what was going on. And we were beginning to make a very good team, but we simply didn't have experience, just a week and a half, really. It wasn't quite enough to get us selected to go to England. And we were offered, Bob Miller was there. He'd built the sails for this Alan Payne board, and I got to know him better, which was good. And he was the people who'd had the Sydney boat built. They wanted to build a new one they had Bob Miller design the boat, and they wanted me and Tony to sail the boat. And we sort of hummed and hawed and thought it was a pretty sort of quite a special opportunity, but we just weren't that excited about catamarans, and our little 12-footers was just so much more lively and sensitive and interesting, and we decided to stick with those a bit longer, which was pretty in a way. It would have been, we certainly, a boat designed by Bob, would have been a lot faster than the British boats at the time, designed by Rod McAlpin Downey. We would have cleaned up. It would have changed the history of the C-class catamaran challenges entirely. For what that's worth.
Yeah. Okay. So
anyway, that was how I met Bob Ross, and so he had the idea of inviting me to run this shop at Modern Boating, selling plans and books, and the rest of my life was falling apart at the time, and I eventually I was there for a year as well. Incidentally, I'm getting to know Bob Miller better. He was designing the Contender at the time. He let me sail a prototype, which was very interesting. So I was very impressed with that one, and if I had been around for longer, I would have got involved with those. But I needed to get back to Britain and back to Scotland, and that's what I did. And that was when I met Roderick McAlpin Downey and did some work with him. He was an interesting guy. Very interesting. Yeah, very intelligent guy. Had a lot of respect for him. Plus, in between, that was, driving vans, and I had an old Volkswagen van, and I offered my services for 30 shillings an hour, transporting people's furniture and junk all over the country. All up and down three flights of stairs. It seemed like the people who were moving from one place to another always lived on the third floor. A lot of exercise.
That was when you had a strong back, though.
Well, not particularly. But,
So you did some moving there, and you went back to the UK. And then when did you actually design your first boat? Or what boat was that, Ian?
The first one was when I worked for the Naval Architect. That was an 18-foot trailer sailor. Richard Hartley's trailer sailors were very popular at the time. This was an attempt to do something a bit more. It would do the same job. It'd be a rather more elegant-looking boat. As far as I know, only one ever got built. It may have been others. But it seemed to work fine. It looked good.
And then what were some of your other early designs, Ian?
The main one was, it was a long, slow process of over years. I was very interested in trimarans, wanting to build one, and at odd times, in between other things, I would sit down and I worked up this design for a 30-foot little cruising trimaran. And I was excited about that. Finally built a model of the boat, and only 30 inches long, a tiny wee thing, but still it sailed spectacularly well. It was very impressive, and didn't have radio control or anything, so it just went for its life, and I had a bit of a job to try and keep up with it, and sometimes I could only save it by it capsizing and waiting for me. And I tried to take some photographs. Well, I did. I got some photographs. I had a big old 2 1/4 square twin lens reflex camera and a tiny little fiberglass dinghy, about 7 feet long, with a seagull outboard on the stern. And so I had a bit of a job with this outboard, trying to keep pace with the model. About 12, 15 knot breeze, and just about keep pace with it. So I'm trying to maneuver the thing into the right place for taking a photograph, which I was able to do with my other hand, sort of, but they were pretty fuzzy, sort of out of focus kind of pictures, but still they worked pretty well. Some of them. And the interesting thing about the design of the trimarans, which I was learning at the time, was to two very experienced trimaran designers I spoke to insisted that the outriggers should be submersible. And but then Dick Newick designed his 30-foot Val trimaran, which went exactly the opposite way. Huge fat outriggers, 150% buoyancy. And he was absolutely right, and the others were absolutely wrong. What was his name? Mike Birch. Very skillful, experienced, successful sailor. He sailed the Dick Newick's Val in the single-handed transatlantic race. And he came second against all these huge, big racing boats, 60, 70-foot catamarans and trimarans and single-hull boats. He went the southern route from the Canary Islands, Azores, was it? And he got to Newport, and he looked around, and all the marina was empty. He says, "Where's everybody?" And somebody said, "Well, they haven't turned up yet."
Oh, wow. And he was the one with the big holes on there, the big outriggers, huh?
Yeah, and so that absolutely proved that Dick Newick was right. And what I did with my model, my outriggers were just about neutral, just about submersible, and in theory, but in fact they were submersible because the boat was a bit overweight, floating quarter-inch below the mark. And so with the downward pressure of the sails, you get a gust of wind on the beam, and they would sink. And so what I did was I added a quarter-inch of balsa wood on the top of the deck on one side, on the starboard side, just to make sure, just enough to make it really positive buoyancy. And what that model proved was that the submersible outrigger in around 15 knots of breeze, which is equivalent to a bit of a gale really, full size, simply just could not sail. It would immediately, a bit of a gust of breeze would immediately dip the outrigger and trip over it. Just could not sail. Turn around on the other tack, the starboard tack, and the harder it blew, she just went faster and faster. Just kept on going. It was amazing. So that tiny 30-inch model proved a fundamental design principle, which big-time, full-size trimaran designers didn't know yet, apart from Dick Newick.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So did you build the 30-foot trimaran, Ian?
Never did, no.
No, okay.
She was a nice-looking boat, good strong sheer, and a bit of an old-fashioned looking boat, really.
So how many boat designs do you have nowadays, Ian?
116, I think it is, that I'm working on.
Wow. So
it's 115 and a half.
Yeah, so what is the range and size on the boats that you design, roughly?
The stock plans are from 6'9" up to 22 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Not counting the 30-foot Sharpie.
Oh, okay.
And other designs I've done, I've got a half model here of a 48-foot clipper gaff catch shallow draft boat. Another one I would have liked to build as a houseboat, boat to live aboard.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I think that's the biggest one I've done.
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite the biggest one I've done. It's a 60-foot galley, Highland galley. The kind of boats that they were up and down the coast here in Scotland. It was the basic means of transport between the islands, because there are many routes, places to go, which are almost inaccessible by land or would take days of travelling, that were within easy reach of each other by sea. The sea was the highway. So these galleys, they call them birlins, which is spelled B-I-R-L-I-N-N, birlin. They're used for every conceivable purpose, and I had an idea of designing about a 30-foot one. Thought that would be an interesting project. But I found some people found me. They wanted to build well, it's a whole other story. There's a guy from Orkney, and also based at Roslin, just south of Edinburgh, where I was living, Prince Henry Sinclair. He sailed to Massachusetts in 1398. And some people wanted to build a replica, something like the kind of ship he might have sailed, and sailed to America in 1998, for the 600th anniversary of his voyage. He had 12 ships at the time, and there was a bit of uncertainty whether they would have been all birlins, or there might have been one or two, at least, of the Mediterranean-type ships, which are much more substantial, and they were carvel built, fully decked in, of course, boats, whereas the birlins they were basically Viking ships, because the Vikings were all up and down the coast here, building ships, obviously. The locals learned how to do it, and when the Vikings were sort of overcome and settling in as well, the locals just kept on building boats in the same way, and the only noticeable difference is they put the rudder in its rightful place on the stern instead of the Viking-style steering oar on the starboard side, from whence, incidentally, came the term starboard steer board. And the other side was the port side, because that was the side towards the port, the jetty, pier, whatever, to protect the oar on the starboard, steering oar on the starboard side. I built a model of that boat, which was very nice, nice little job, and in the process did a huge amount of research. It was a great opportunity to do a lot of research on the Viking ships, especially because there's a huge amount of information available from Norway, and mainly from the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde in Denmark. Done some wonderful books, because they've done a tremendous amount of research on the museum was originally built for the 5 ships that they dug up and rebuilt as best they could. So that was very useful and invaluable information. There was not much available on the Scottish ships, because there were not the same conditions for preserving hulls, there was not the same tradition of burying burial boats. At Roskilde was more sheltered water, and the boats, what they were, the boats that were sunk there deliberately, were preserved surprisingly well. But there's nothing survived in Scotland at all, partly because, for several reasons, there's not the same conditions for preserving them. The tides are more fierce, and they tended to, if they're building a new ship, if the old ship was worn out, they would use as much of the timber from the old boat as they could, so the boats were broken up, and any usable planking material, framing material would get recycled. And another major factor was when the British, the Royal Navy, were responsible for had a lot of work to do in the suppression of the Highland clans. and they sent men of war ships up and down the west coast in this area, destroying any ships they found over about 15 feet long, tiny wee ships they were allowed to keep just for fishing, but nothing big enough could be any kind of a threat to the powers that be.
Wow, so the Scottish boats just weren't around anymore, huh?
Yeah, well, all we've got is a large number of carvings on mainly grave slabs, and sometimes in churches, and they're pretty much a consistent sort of style. You might get on a grave slab, you would get a knight with his sword and helmet and whatever, and various kinds of decorations, which often included a berlin as a kind of status symbol. And they were generally compressed fore and aft, as it were, to fit in the space, because it might only be sort of 15, 18 inches long, the ship, and so the bow and stern tend to be very, very high, way out of proportion. But it turns out when these carvings are studied, it's possible to. There's one guy I know in Glasgow who's done this work. Mike Giles was intending to write a book about them, which I hope he will. He was able to discern differences, characteristics in different areas, from builders in Iona, in Mull, in Lewis, and the west coast of the mainland, and that was interesting. And sometimes out of a kind of long overhanging bow, and sometimes a more vertical kind of a bow. Always the stern was more vertical for shipping the rudder. And so, although these carvings are distorted artificially, as I said, and also pretty crude, primitive, very basic, not well detailed at all, not trying to be an accurate representation. Still, Mike found that by studying them carefully, you could realize that a lot of these guys doing the carvings had a very clear idea of what they were looking at. There's the most detailed one of them, the best of them, this representation in a church in the Isle of Harris, which is not far north and west from here. You can see it when the weather's nicer than it is today. Very detailed carving. It shows all the strakes, it shows all the fastenings, it shows all the oar ports, it shows the rigging and all the rudder fittings. It's still a bit distorted. The bow and stern is still very high, and but from the number of oar ports, you can deduce that the vessel was around 70 feet long, one of the bigger ones. And the rigging is interesting. The way the halyards and braces, forestay, shrouds, the way everything is arranged is exactly Viking method. It even has the shrouds, forestay, etc., laid on top, one on top of each other, all in the right order at the masthead. They're again relatively very fat and out of proportion, but it's interesting to see how this the whole sailing rig was just exactly the same as the Viking ships. The only difference was the braces on the yard were inboard from the ends. Fortunately, those people who wanted to build this 60-footer never did it. And I say fortunately because they really simply didn't know what they were doing. It would have been years of building and sailing experience, and they thought they could, within a year, and as we were running out of time, thought they could, within a year and a half, build a ship and get a bit of sailing practice and sail to America. But it wouldn't have worked,
Yeah.
That was very useful building the model, and I used that experience in building another model of a 48-foot Berlin for people in Glasgow called the Gale, which is Galgael. And that's a group of people in Glasgow, a pretty rough area of Glasgow, which is a pretty rough town in some areas. Building boats, getting a lot of experience doing all kinds of woodwork, building furniture, and what they're doing is, how do I describe it? They're just welcoming people in off the street. A lot of whom are unemployed, or they're coming off drugs, or they've come out of prison. Some of them are in fairly desperate circumstances. They can wander into the Galgaels, and they'll be given a cup of tea. If they hang about, they'll be given a bit of work to do. Many of them do hang about and get very involved in the things that are going on. They're having Christmas fair today, which I'm missing, which is a shame. That'll be a lot of fun. And they've got some good experience building boats, and this was a long-term ambition by the guy who started it all, Colin McLeod. He wanted to build a 48-foot Berlin, sail all up and down the coast of west coast of Scotland, establishing new, sustainable, independent communities and reinvigorating the entire Scottish heritage and culture and so on, which they haven't quite got to yet.
Wow.
But, as I say, it's a useful experience having worked on the bigger boat. So in building a model for the 48-foot boat, which they still have, they're getting a bit knocked about now, unfortunately. But so those were interesting diversions.
Yeah. So the Viking method of building and designs and stuff had a big influence on your designs, right, Iain? Is that a fair statement, or?
Well, indirectly, I think only in the, I've not done anything for myself, anything like the actual Viking ships, but the smaller boats have been very strongly influenced by the Shetland boats, which, of course, came originally from Norway. Very much the Norwegian tradition. The same kind of construction and similar sailing routes and so on.
Yeah. Are most of your boats lap straight construction then, Iain?
Yeah, most of them.
Yeah, okay. So do you have any favorites among all your designs?
Well, my long-term favorite is these double enders. I had a friend, never actually met him, but he became a friend, nice guy, who was in Philadelphia and moved to the West Coast, somewhere around the Seattle area. He wanted about a 19-20-foot double ender. Did the first Caledonia yawl for the design that became the Caledonia yawl. And that worked out, considering I had no experience of building or sailing a boat like that, it turned out surprisingly well. It's been a great success, the design. And it's still built in considerable numbers, more and more in North America, in fact. There's a few in Maine especially. They wanted a smaller boat. I did a couple of smaller designs, 14-foot 6, 16-foot 6. And then I had the idea of building a boat for myself. The 16.5-foot boat, I took that basic design, stretched it out to 19-foot 2, turned out. That became the first Ness yawl, and which I built for myself with help from some friends. And that was turned out to be a very useful experience because I simply did not have enough building experience or sailing experience at the time. Well, maybe I still don't, but at the time I'd get guys phoning me with all kinds of technical questions, all kinds of information they wanted. and I'm doing my best, but I'm realizing that these guys are out there every weekend sailing. They know more about it than I do. This is when I was in London. I could never afford a boat myself. I had nowhere to sail. So it seemed a bit unreal. But the Nurseol turned out also to be very successful, and not long after I built the boat, the Port Soy Traditional Boat Festival began, and that was a wonderful experience because partly it's a wonderful place and a wonderful collection of all kinds of boats, all kinds of different shapes and sizes would turn up. And the boat did very well in the racing. And this was the beginning of my real sailing experience in these boats. And obviously actually building the boats was, I was never able to do it very much. It was, I can still reckon, an essential part of the, fundamental part of the design process. Then after that, the raids began. French people, Charles-Henri turned up with his pals wanting to do an expedition up the Great Glen, which is a long, straight waterway between Fort William and Inverness. It's about 70 miles. And it's the big lochs, Loch Ness, and several smaller ones joined up with the canals. And it was for shipping and fishing boats to travel across from the North Sea to the West Coast and back without having to go all the way around the top. So that was quite a dramatic event, building that canal, and now it's very useful for all kinds of cruising boat sailors. Okay. So then the raids were a wonderful experience because very intense. You get all kinds of conditions in, well, the lochs, the winds tend to be very fierce. Although they're in the direction of the southwest wind, you'd think you'd get a nice steady breeze. Not at all. It comes from this way and down over the hills. You get very sudden, hard squalls and from different varying directions. And the water is extremely cold. You need to keep out of it. And with the racing, the first raid, we had 42 boats, and they got less and less after that. But French people did it for 3 times, hoping to get the event established and hoping that local people would take over and keep it going, which they have done, but on a smaller scale. But anyway, as I say, it was a tremendously useful experience, pushing the boat as hard as you could in all these different conditions. With the races, small sort of informal races, 1 or 2 in a day, relatively short distances, you tended to be able to push the boat a wee bit harder. We all weren't very serious about the racing, of course, at all, were we? However, when it comes down to it, you're wanting to, there's that French boat, there's that German boat, and you've got to get these buggers, And so you're tempted to push the boat a little harder than you normally sensibly would, perhaps even a little beyond what is really sensibly seaworthy, because there's lots of other boats around and there are rescue boats. So if you do get into trouble, you can survive. Whereas if you were on your own, you would not be carrying full sail and 30 knots of breeze, dead downwind in Loch Ness. You wouldn't do it. But when it eases off to 15 knots or so, and you think, oh, well, there's a nice moderate breeze, let's shake out the reefs and see what we can do. And there's about a minute and a half after you shake out the reefs, it's again at 33 knots. And you get quite a lively ride. But what's good about this is that you really learn the potential of the boat. You learn a lot more about pushing things to the edge, nearer to the edge, you learn the real potential of the boat, how she behaves in these conditions, and you learn about reefing and generally setting the boat up for harder weather, and you learn the actual practical skills of handling the boat in these conditions. So it's a wonderful experience, and I reckon it was about a whole season's worth of sailing experience crammed into a week. It's quite exhausting.
Wow.
Yeah, I did that 5 times. And,
oh, wow.
And that was about enough.
Yeah. So, Ian, what boats do you have for yourself these days that you get out on?
I have no boats at all now.
No boats at all, really?
Well, I've got an old Canadian canoe waiting for restoration, but no boats to play with.
Okay. Are you gonna build yourself one soon?
Nope.
No? Okay.
No, I feel I've done that, and learned what I needed from those raids mainly, and from building boats for them, and having done that, having that fairly intense kind of educational experience, I don't need to go sailing every possible opportunity as I used to. I just don't need to do it. We have a group of friends. One thing I do, we have some good friends from Edinburgh, have a nice place on the west coast in Argyll, which is about 4 or 5 hours drive south of here. Beginning of May every year, they have a weekend of mostly appropriate boats and the right kind of people, and that's a lot of fun as well. So I usually go down there. But last time I took my own boat, it was such a thankful, that's a Scots word, which means such a hassle. Getting the boat all loaded up, and all the gear, and all the stuff you need, and all the tools, and all your clothes. It's a lot of work, even having the boat all up and ready to go. 5 hours driving down there, across the water on the ferry to the island, and having done all of this, I remembered rigging the boat for the first little expedition we were doing. And it was blowing very hard. It was gusting force 8, and it was supposed to be easing off in the afternoon. And I'm hoisting this jib, and we got one of these hard gusts. And the jib was flogging and crashing and banging around, knocked off my glasses, and I needed some help, and there was nobody around. And I thought, what am I doing this for? What's the point? Do I really want to be doing this? You say we had some fun for a day or two, and then you've got to go through the whole process all to get back again.
Yeah.
Sort out the boat, apart from maintaining the boat and all the rest of it. And I just, as I say, don't need to do it. And if people offered me to come for sale on my boat, I think, well, what's the point, really? If I have something to learn from this boat, sure, I'll be very interested and I'll learn what I can. But if I do it, I feel a bit like a friend when I was at Findhorn by the bay. Took a Norwegian friend for sail in a little acorn skiff. He'd grown up on the west coast with boats all the time. Boats like we have bicycles and boats all the time. And he was kind of surprised at the experience. And I couldn't understand what was going on. And what he said to me afterwards was, it's the first time in his whole life he'd ever gone for sail in a boat, just for fun, not for some practical reason, Just to do that, like you don't go for driving your car just for fun.
Yeah. Wow, that's funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
as I say, I'm just wanting to direct the brain to other things. I want to be doing other things besides the boats as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, are you building boats these days, or mainly designing, or doing both, Ian, or doing other stuff?
Well, as I say, I'm looking for other stuff, but I don't have much time because I have to spend a lot of time doing emails and phone calls and writing letters and printing plans and photocopying bits of paper and all that kind of stuff. And trying to get efficient with the emails and say what needs to be said in the absolute minimal amount of, to be very clear and concise, with messages, putting across the information that's necessary as well as I can in the shortest possible time, the minimal number of words, which might sound like a pretty curt and unfriendly kind of message sometimes, but that's the only way to do it. If you're not going to spend whole days doing it,
Yeah, email can take a lot of time, huh?
Yeah. Plus, I got to fix the chimney because the top's blown off it and the water was coming down the chimney, and I can't fix it yet, and I'm going to put a plastic bucket over the top of it. And I'm going to clear all the leaves out of the gutters, and I've got to weatherproof this old car and all those things like that. And it's kind of ironic situation in a way because I've now, at last, got a superb garage workshop, which is exactly the workshop I always wanted. Which is ironic because I'm not needing it in the same way that I always wanted.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a young guy came over. I had a setup. I was building a stickleback canoe, a 10'8" tiny wee canoe. And it was 3 years after I'd set up the molds and the backbone, laminated stem and stern. And it's a nice boat. Cut out the garboards already, and I just never had time to plank up the boat. And a young guy, he's got a bit of experience at the boat building academy, South Coast of England, very good school, came wanting experience, and so I set him to planking up the canoe, and that seemed like, he said, I thought, well, maybe I started getting lots of ideas about all the boats that we could build if it worked out. A whole range of the new dinghy designs and these 3 canoe designs, sailing versions, paddling versions, decked-in versions, traditional versions. Started getting a bit excited about these possibilities if it worked out, but it didn't really quite work out because the guy, although he was a very nice guy and we got on well, I liked him, and he was quite, he just wasn't careful enough with not working with us to the same level of precision that I do. A 10'8" canoe, I wanted everything to be absolutely precise to within the 16th of an inch, like the Lines plan is. Partly to just confirm that the design is exactly right. Well, that's the main reason, yeah. And but Ewan wasn't too bothered about the 16th of an inch, an eighth of an inch, or even a quarter of an inch here or there. It was not too important because he'd been working on helping repairing old fishing boats and things. Quarter inch is nothing, And, so the boat wasn't quite the right shape, which bothered me a bit. It wasn't quite the boat I wanted.
Yeah.
It should have been a bit of an amateurish job, which surprised me because, as I say, boat building academy has very high standards of craftsmanship. And so I didn't know what I was going to do with this boat. It wasn't quite finished, but fortunately a friend from France came over and fell in love with the boat, and I pointed out the deficiencies and imperfections, and so on. They were totally irrelevant to him. He wasn't bothered at all. He just loved the boat.
Cool.
He's got no money, and he sent me €200. He might be able to. He's determined to try and pay for the boat sometime, which would be probably across the cost of materials, and that's about all. But
yeah,
I'm so pleased to find a good home for the boat.
Yeah, very good. Well, we're going to wrap it up here, Ian. If somebody's interested in buying some of your plans or kits, how would they do that? What's the best way?
Well, Wooden Boat have most of the stock plans. And 2 other major sources. One is Stray Dog Boats in South Australia, good friend Robert Ailiff. He's also incidentally a very good source of general information. And a thing called Classic Marine in England. They sell the plans, and what happens is if somebody orders a plan from them, they pass the order on to me, and I print it and send it on anyway. And I get 2/3 of the price instead of the whole price.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So woodenboat.com, Stray Dog Boats, and Classic Marine in the UK.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. Ian, any parting thoughts you'd like to leave with the listeners?
Just to complete that last story, major source of his plans is himself, of course.
Very good. Okay, well, thanks so much, Ian.
You're very welcome, and good to have a chat, and look forward to.
And we'll stay on the phone here for part 2.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ian, for doing that interview. You are a gentleman and a scholar, and I've really enjoyed connecting with you, even though there's an 8-hour time difference. It worked out great. So thank you so much for doing that, and I look forward to playing your part 2 here in the next couple of weeks. If you'd like to connect with me, you can do so by email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can also find me on YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest, and Facebook. I knew there was one more there. If you look for Wooden Boat Dan, you can connect with me there. It's fun stuff. I would love it if you would go to iTunes and leave a review for the podcast. Last time I checked, I had 50 reviews there, which is pretty awesome. You can also subscribe to the podcast there. And if you go to my website, to the homepage, hookedonwoodenboats.com, I've got a couple books for sale there. One is my book about starting your first wooden boat, and there's a book there by Russell Brown on using epoxy that's really good. And then on the resources page, there's other books that are wooden boat related, so check those out too. They're good resources, and if you do make a purchase there, I get paid a small commission, which I appreciate very much. Thanks again for listening. Have a very Merry Christmas. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan over and out. God bless. Until we talk again next week. Take care.